Brian Rourke wiped the grease from his hands with a shop rag, the familiar smell of motor oil and metal shavings filling his home workshop. The custom fabrication project on his workbench could wait another few minutes. Through the open garage door, he heard Grady's excited voice from the kitchen. Dad, come look at this." Brian walked through the connecting door into the house, finding his 8-year-old son hunched over the laptop at the kitchen table. Grady's fingers moved across the trackpad with the confidence of a digital native. "What's got you so worked up, buddy?" "I'm looking at Grandma Clara's house on Google Earth. Look at all this cool stuff in her backyard." Brian pulled a chair next to his son. The satellite image on screen showed Clara Bexley's property from above, the familiar layout of her ranch-style home, and the large backyard where Grady often played during visits. But something caught Brian's attention immediately. "When was this picture taken?" Brian asked, leaning closer. "Says here it was updated 3 weeks ago." Grady zoomed in with the mouse wheel. "See that big tarp thing? And look at all those tire tracks in the grass." Brian's eyes narrowed. A large, dark tarp covered what appeared to be a substantial mound near the back fence. Deep tire ruts scarred the usually pristine lawn, the kind left by heavy trucks. Several items he didn't recognize sat scattered around the covered area. "That's weird," Grady continued, oblivious to his father's growing concern. "Grandma Clara always keeps her yard super clean. Remember how mad she got when I left my bike on the grass last time?" Brian remembered. Clara Bexley maintained her property with military precision, every blade of grass in place, every garden tool properly stored. The chaotic scene in the satellite image looked nothing like the woman who once spent an entire afternoon lecturing Lena about proper hedge trimming. "Can you go back to Street View?" Brian asked. Grady clicked through the interface. The street-level view showed Clara's house as Brian remembered it, well-maintained, unremarkable, the front yard immaculate. "The satellite and street view don't match up," Brian muttered. "What do you mean, Dad?" "Nothing, son. Just thinking out loud." Brian reached over and took a screenshot, saving the image to the desktop. "Why don't you go work on your homework? I'll start dinner in a few minutes. Can we have grilled cheese?" "Sure thing." After Grady disappeared upstairs, Brian stared at the satellite image. His military training had taught him to notice inconsistencies, to trust his instincts when something felt wrong. The tarp, the tire tracks, the scattered debris, none of it fit Clara's personality or normal routine. But he grabbed his phone and scrolled to Clara's contact. His thumb hovered over the call button before he changed his mind. Better to see for himself first. No point in jumping to conclusions. Brian opened a new browser tab and navigated to his cloud storage, uploading the screenshot with a timestamp. If his suspicions proved correct, he'd want a record of when he first noticed the discrepancy. The house felt quiet around him as he planned his next move. Lena wouldn't be home for another hour. Her yoga class ran until 6. That gave him time to think, to approach this rationally. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "Measure twice, cut once, Brian." Same rule applies to everything in life. The next afternoon, Brian buckled Grady into the passenger seat of his pickup truck. "Where are we going, Dad?" "Thought we'd surprise Grandma Clara with a visit." "Cool. Can we stop for ice cream on the way back?" "We'll see." Brian pulled out of their driveway on Maple Ridge Lane, the familiar tree-lined streets of their neighborhood passing by his windows. The 20-minute drive to Clara's house gave him time to rehearse his approach. Casual. Friendly. Just a father and son dropping by to visit Clara's house, sat on a corner lot in an older part of town, the kind of neighborhood where retired couples tended their gardens and watched the street through parted curtains. Brian parked in the driveway and noticed immediately that the front yard looked exactly as it had in the street view image. Perfect. "Stay close to me, okay, buddy?" "Sure, Dad." They walked to the front door together. Brian rang the doorbell and waited, listening for movement inside. Footsteps approached, and the door opened to reveal Clara Bexley, T61. Clara maintained the same rigid posture she'd probably held since childhood. Her gray hair sat in a perfect bob, not a strand out of place despite the afternoon heat. She wore a floral print blouse and pressed slacks, dressed as if she'd been expecting company. "Brian." "Grady." Her tone held surprise, but not pleasure. "What brings you by?" "Just thought we'd stop in and say hello." "Hope that's okay." Of course. Clara stepped aside to let them enter, but Brian caught her glancing toward the backyard. Lena isn't with you? No, she had some errands to run. Brian guided Grady into the living room, noting how Clara's eyes followed their movement. Mind if Grady plays in the backyard? He's been cooped up inside all day. Actually, the yard isn't really suitable for playing right now. I've been having some landscaping work done. Brian nodded thoughtfully. Oh, what kind of work? Clara's pause lasted a beat too long. Just some drainage issues. You know how the rain pools back there during winter, right? Brian glanced toward the sliding glass door that led to the patio. The vertical blinds were closed, unusual for Clara, who typically kept them open to let in natural light. Where's Lena, by the way? I thought she might be here. Lena? Why would she be here? She mentioned stopping by today to help with something. Maybe I'm misunderstood. Clara's face tightened almost imperceptibly. She just stepped out. Running to the store, I think. Brian smiled and nodded, filing away the lie. Lena's phone had pinged from their house 30 minutes ago when she received a text. She was home, not at Clara's, and certainly not at any store. Mind if I use your bathroom? Of course. You know where it is. Brian walked down the familiar hallway, but instead of entering the bathroom, he made a quick detour through the kitchen to the back window. Pulling the curtain aside slightly, he peered into the backyard. The tarp was gone. The scattered debris had disappeared. But the evidence of recent activity remained obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. The grass showed clear signs of being hastily resodded in patches. Dark soil-marked areas where someone had filled in depressions. Near the back fence, scorch marks indicated a recent burn pile. Most telling of all, tire ruts still pressed deep into the softer ground near the alley gate, too fresh and deep to have been made by Clara's compact sedan. Brian flushed the toilet and ran water in the sink for cover before returning to the living room. Everything okay back there? Clara asked. Fine, though I noticed quite a bit of work being done. Must be expensive. It's necessary. Brian knelt down to Grady's level. Hey, buddy, why don't you go look at Grandma Clara's photo albums? I want to talk to her about something boring. Grady wandered toward the bookshelf where Clara kept her collection of family photos. Brian waited until his son was out of earshot before speaking again. Clara, is everything all right? You seem nervous. I'm not nervous. I just wasn't expecting visitors. You're usually more organized than this. The backyard looks like a construction zone. Clara's jaw tightened. I told you it's drainage work. Brian nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the room. Something metallic caught his attention on the side table, his own hammer, the one with electrical tape wrapped around the handle where he'd repaired crack. He'd been looking for that tool for weeks. That's my hammer, he said quietly. Clara followed his gaze. Oh, that. Lena borrowed it for something. I forgot to give it back. When did she borrow it? I don't remember exactly. Brian picked up the hammer, noting fresh scratches on the metal head. Looks like it's seen some heavy use recently. I wouldn't know about that. The chemical smell hit him then, subtle but unmistakable. Bleach, mixed with something else. Something that reminded him of the industrial cleaners they'd used in the military to remove stains and odors. Dad, can we go now? Grady called from across the room. I'm getting bored. Sure thing. Brian pocketed the hammer without asking permission. Clara, thanks for letting us stop by. Of course. At the front door, Brian paused. Tell Lena I said hello when she gets back from the store. Clara's nod was tight and quick. I will. As Brian backed out of the driveway, he watched Clara in his rearview mirror. She stood in the doorway until his truck disappeared around the corner, then quickly closed the door. Dad, why did Grandma Clara act so weird? What do you mean, buddy? She kept looking at the back door like she was worried about something. And she never offered us cookies or anything. Brian smiled grimly. His son's observation skills impressed him more each day. People have off days, Grady. Don't worry about it. But Brian was worrying. The inconsistencies added up to something bigger than drainage work or landscaping. The hasty cleanup, the lies about Lena's whereabouts, the chemical smell, his missing hammer found in Clara's possession, each detail painted a picture he didn't like. That evening, Brian waited until Lena was in the shower before opening their shared laptop. The familiar desktop appeared, cluttered with Lena's folders and shortcuts. He navigated to their banking website and logged into their joint checking account. The transaction history loaded slowly. Brian scrolled through the recent activity, looking for anything unusual. Most entries looked normal: grocery stores, gas stations, the usual household expenses. Then he found at point 3 days ago, Lena had withdrawn $200 in cash from an ATM across town. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Brian remembered that Tuesday clearly because Lena had told him she was attending a new yoga class that met from 2:00 to 3:30. The ATM was nowhere near any yoga studio. Brian opened a new browser tab and searched for yoga studios in their area. The closest one to the ATM was 15 minutes away, and their Tuesday class schedule showed no sessions during the afternoon. He navigated back to the bank statement and kept searching. 2 weeks earlier, another cash withdrawal. Same amount, similar time, different ATM. Always on days when Lena claimed to be at yoga or running errands that should have kept her closer to home. The shower shut off upstairs. Brian quickly cleared the browser history and closed the laptop, returning to his position on the couch where he'd been reading a fabrication magazine. Lena appeared 10 minutes later, wearing her robe and toweling her hair dry. "How was your day?" she asked. "Good. Grady and I visited your mom." Lena paused in her hair drying. "Oh, how is she?" "Seemed fine. Mentioned you just stepped out to the store, right? I stopped by earlier to help her with something." Brian nodded, not looking up from his magazine. "What kind of help?" "Just organizing some things in the garage. Nothing exciting." Another lie. Clara's garage had been visible through a side window during their visit. It was empty except for her car and the usual storage shelves, all as organized as ever. "That's nice of you." Lena sat on the opposite end of the couch. "Did you notice anything weird about Mom's backyard?" She mentioned having some work done. "Drainage issues," she said. "Right, drainage." Brian turned a page in his magazine, maintaining his casual exterior while his mind cataloged every inconsistency. "Must be expensive work. All that equipment and materials." "I wouldn't know. She handles her own finances." "Of course." After Lena went to bed, Brian returned to the laptop. He navigated to a software download site and installed a discrete keylogger program, something that would run in the background and record all keyboard activity. If Lena was hiding something, her computer usage would eventually reveal it. Next, he opened his phone and accessed the Find My app. Among the family devices listed, he found the AirTag he'd purchased months ago for Grady's backpack but never used. Brian removed it from Grady's bag and slipped it into his pocket. The next morning, Brian waited until Lena left for her supposed yoga class before driving to Clara's neighborhood. He parked 2 blocks away and walked to her house, approaching from the alley behind her property. The back gate stood unlocked. Clara's car sat in the driveway, but her garage door was closed. Brian crept along the fence line until he found a gap between the wooden slats. Through it, he could see the entire backyard clearly. The hasty resodding was even more obvious in daylight. Rectangular patches of new grass created a checkerboard pattern across the lawn. The filled-in areas were settling unevenly, creating small depressions in the ground. Near the back fence, Brian spotted fresh concrete footings, the kind used for temporary structures. Whatever had been back here, it had required serious support. He made his way to Clara's car and quickly attached the AirTag to the underside of her rear bumper, using the magnetic case he'd ordered online. The device would track Clara's movements without her knowledge. On his way home, Brian stopped at an outdoor supply store and purchased a trail camera designed for wildlife monitoring. The clerk recommended a model with night vision and motion activation. "Planning to catch some deer on your property?" the clerk asked. "Something like that." That afternoon, while Clara was presumably running errands and Lena was wherever she actually went during yoga, Brian returned to install the camera. He positioned it in a large oak tree that bordered Clara's backyard, angling the lens to capture the maximum area while keeping the device hidden among the branches. The camera's wireless capability would send alerts and images directly to his phone whenever motion was detected. By evening, Brian had established 3 separate monitoring systems. The keylogger tracking Lena's computer activity, the AirTag following Clara's vehicle, and the trail camera watching Clara's backyard. He cooked dinner. and helped Grady with homework, maintaining the routine of normal family life while gathering intelligence on his wife's deception. "Dad, you seem quiet tonight," Grady observed during dinner. "Just thinking about work, buddy. Are you building something cool?" "Maybe. We'll see how it turns out." Lena pushed food around her plate, eating little. "Everything okay with you?" Brian asked. "Fine. Just tired. Yoga class wearing you out?" Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "It's challenging. The instructor pushes us pretty hard." "What's the instructor's name?" "I might look into joining myself." "Her name is Michelle. I don't think you'd like her teaching style." Brian nodded and changed the subject to Grady's upcoming school project. But he filed away another lie. When he'd searched for yoga studios earlier, he'd called 3 of them. None employed an instructor named Michelle. That night, as Lena slept beside him, Brian stared at the ceiling and planned his next moves. His grandfather had taught him that the best defense was preparation, and preparation required information. Whatever Lena and Clara were hiding, he would uncover it. And when he did, he would be ready. 2 weeks of surveillance yielded a disturbing pattern. The keylogger had captured everything Lena typed, including passwords, search queries, and private messages. Brian reviewed the logs each morning after she left for her fabricated yoga sessions. The financial picture emerged first. Lena had created a hidden Venmo account using an email address Brian didn't recognize. Small transactions flowed regularly between her account and one belonging to TB Construction, amounts ranging from $50 to $200, both sent and received. Brian cross-referenced the dates with Clara's AirTag data. Every Venmo transaction coincided with Clara's car, leaving her house and driving to locations across town. Sometimes the hardware store, sometimes a storage facility, once to an industrial supply company that specialized in concrete and landscaping materials. The search history was worse. Lena had researched topics that chilled Brian's blood. How to move out with child without consent, emergency custody laws Oregon, what evidence do police need for domestic violence report, how to document emotional abuse, restraining order requirements. Each search was followed by visits to legal advice websites and forums for divorced women. Lena was building a case against him, laying groundwork for a narrative he didn't recognize. The most damning evidence came from recovered deleted files. The keylogger had captured draft messages Lena typed, but never sent. Practice runs for conversation she was planning. .1 draft. Addressed her friend Jessica. Read, "I can't live like this anymore. Brian is becoming increasingly controlling and emotionally distant. I'm worried about Grady being exposed to this environment. I need to make a change soon." Another, written but not sent to an unknown recipient. "The plan is moving forward. Mom's backyard is clean now. Just need to establish the pattern we discussed, and we can move to phase 2. Brian printed everything and organized it in a folder hidden in his workshop. Each piece of evidence was dated, time-stamped, and categorized. The trail camera provided visual confirmation of the conspiracy. 3 times in 2 weeks, it captured Lena and Clara meeting with a man Brian didn't recognize. Tall, muscular build, wearing work clothes, and driving a white pickup truck with construction equipment. In one video, the man helped Clara load something heavy into his truck bed while Lena stood watch. In another, all 3 stood in animated conversation near the back fence, the man pointing toward different areas of the yard while taking notes. Brian enhanced the images using photo editing software until he could make out the truck's license plate. A quick online search revealed the vehicle was registered to Trevor Blaine, owner of TB Construction. Cross-referencing Trevor's business license showed a history of code violations and a recently filed insurance claim for stolen equipment. The man had a pattern of operating just outside legal boundaries. On a Thursday morning, Brian intercepted a phone conversation between Lena and Clara using an app that recorded calls made from their home's landline. "Are you sure this will work?" Lena's voice was tense, worried. "Trevor knows what he's doing, sweetie. Men like Brian always snap when they're cornered. You just need to document the right kind of behavior. I don't want him to actually hurt Grady or me. He won't, but he'll yell, lose his temper, say things that sound threatening. Then we can use that against him. What if Brian doesn't react the way we expect? Trust me, honey. I know his type. Push the right buttons, and they always show their true colors. You deserve better than living with someone so cold and emotionally unavailable. Brian listened to the recording 3 times, memorizing every word. They were planning to provoke him into behavior they could use against him in custody proceedings. That afternoon, he drove to a different part of town and met with a private investigator recommended by his lawyer's office. The PI reviewed Brian's evidence and nodded approvingly. This is solid work. Most people collect half this much documentation after years of suspicion. You've built a comprehensive case in 2 weeks. What's my next step? We need to determine the full scope of the conspiracy. Keep gathering intelligence, but be careful. If they suspect, they might accelerate their timeline. Brian nodded. How long before I should take legal action? Soon. False accusations can be filed quickly and do immediate damage. Don't wait for them to make the first move. Driving home, Brian felt the weight of what he discovered. His marriage was over, that much was clear. But Lena and Clara were planning something that went beyond divorce. They wanted to destroy his reputation and steal his son. That evening, Lena made an unusual request. I think we should take a family vacation soon. Maybe go camping for a weekend, just the 3 of us. What brought this on? I feel like we've been distant lately. Some time away might help us reconnect. Brian studied her face, looking for tells. What are you thinking? Maybe that state park up near Mount Hood. Remember how much Grady loved it last time? Brian remembered. The park was isolated, surrounded by dense forest, hours from cell phone coverage. An ideal location for staging an incident that would have no independent witnesses. Sounds nice. When were you thinking? Next weekend. I'll check my work schedule. After dinner, Brian reviewed his surveillance footage again. Trevor Blaine had visited Clara's house that afternoon while Brian was meeting with a private investigator. The trail camera showed him and Clara examining something in the garage, both pointing toward Brian's house visible in the distance. They were conducting reconnaissance, studying sight lines and approach routes. Whatever they were planning required advanced preparation. The trail camera alert pinged Brian's phone at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday night. He was in his workshop, supposedly working late on a custom motorcycle part, but actually monitoring his surveillance systems. The camera's night vision revealed 2 figures entering Clara's backyard through the alley gate. Brian recognized Lena immediately despite the darkness. The man with her had to be Trevor Blaine. They moved with purpose, not like lovers stealing a romantic moment, but like conspirators conducting business. Trevor carried a large duffel bag while Lena held a flashlight. They walked directly to Clara's garage. Brian watched them load items from the garage into Trevor's truck, heavy items that required both of them to lift. The audio was too distant to pick up conversation, but their body language suggested urgency. After 20 minutes, they finished loading and stood talking near the truck. Trevor pulled out what looked like a tablet or large phone, showing Lena something on the screen. She nodded repeatedly, occasionally pointing toward Brian's house. When they finished their business discussion, Trevor didn't leave immediately. Instead, he pulled Lena close and kissed her. Not a quick peck, but a passionate embrace that lasted nearly a minute. Brian felt no jealousy, only cold calculation. The affair confirmed what he'd suspected. This wasn't just about divorce or custody. Lena had found a replacement, someone who offered her more than just companionship. After Trevor left, Lena remained in the backyard for several minutes, using her phone. The trail camera's audio picked up fragments of a call. It's done. Next phase this weekend. Make sure you're ready. She ended the call and walked back through the alley toward home. Brian shut down his workshop and went inside, arriving at their bedroom just as Lena slipped under the covers. How was yoga? He asked quietly. Good. Michelle introduced some new poses. I'm exhausted. Brian nodded in the darkness. Sleep well. The next morning, he returned to Clara's backyard while both women were out. The garage stood empty except for Clara's car and usual storage items. Whatever Lena and Trevor had loaded was gone, but they'd left evidence behind. Fresh tire tracks in the alley dirt showed the tread pattern of Trevor's truck. More importantly, they discarded something in Clara's outdoor trash bin. Brian found a crumpled receipt from a hardware store dated the previous day. The items purchased included rope, plastic sheeting, and a battery-powered drill. Below the itemized list, someone had written notes in pencil. Saturday, early morning campsite, 7 make call at 8 a.m. Trevor approaches from North Trail, near the back fence. Partially hidden by fresh landscaping, Brian discovered the most damning evidence yet. In what remained of a burn pile, he found the charred remains of a photograph. Most of it had been destroyed, but he could make out enough to recognize it a family photo of himself and Grady from last Christmas. The edges blackened and curled by fire. Someone had burned their family picture. The symbolism was clear and chilling. Brian photographed everything, including the burnt remains of the photo, then carefully returned the receipt to the trash. Let them think their plan remained secret. That afternoon, he visited the same hardware store and spoke with the clerk who'd processed the transaction. "Yeah, I remember those two. Woman and a guy in work clothes. She seemed nervous, kept looking around like she was worried someone would see her. Did they say what the supplies were for?" The guy said they were fixing a roof leak, needed to cover some equipment overnight. But that's weird, right? Who covers roof equipment with plastic sheeting? Brian thanked the clerk and left. Their story didn't make sense because they weren't buying supplies for legitimate construction work. The camping trip was definitely a setup. They planned to stage some kind of incident at a specific campsite, with Trevor positioned nearby to play whatever role their scheme required. Brian spent the rest of the week preparing his own countermeasures, but he had no intention of walking into their trap. By now, he had enough evidence to destroy their conspiracy through legal channels. He just needed them to make one more move that would give him everything he needed for a complete victory. Monday morning, Brian sat across from David Martinez, one of Portland's most respected family law attorneys. Martinez's office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, with windows overlooking the Willamette River. "This is the most comprehensive documentation I've seen from a client," Martinez said, reviewing Brian's evidence folder. "Most people come to me with suspicions and hurt feelings. You've built a federal case. I want to be thorough." Martinez spread the surveillance photos across his desk. "These images of your wife and this Trevor character conducting what appears to be reconnaissance of your property, combined with the financial records and recorded conversations, suggest a conspiracy to commit fraud." Brian placed the photograph of the burnt family picture on the desk. "They burned this in Claire's backyard. It's a photo of me and Grady from Christmas." Martinez examined the charred remains through a magnifying glass. Symbolic destruction of the family unit. This suggests deep premeditation and psychological manipulation. What's our strongest legal position? Emergency custody petition. With evidence of premeditated conspiracy and plans to remove your son from the state, a judge will almost certainly grant temporary sole custody, pending a full hearing. Brian nodded. "How quickly can we file? I can have paperwork ready by end of business today." "But Brian, once we file these documents, there's no going back. Your marriage will be over, and this will become a legal war." "My marriage is already over. I'm just making it official." Martinez pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "I'll prepare an emergency custody petition, a temporary restraining order against your wife, and documents requesting immediate possession of the marital home. We'll also file a civil complaint against all 3 conspirators for fraud, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." "What about criminal charges?" "That's up to the district attorney, but your evidence definitely supports criminal conspiracy charges. The recorded conversations about manipulating you and the burnt family photo constitute clear evidence of premeditation." Brian spent 2 hours with Martinez, reviewing every piece of evidence and planning their legal strategy. The attorney was particularly interested in the camping trip setup and the burnt photograph. "This shows they're not just planning to divorce you, they're planning to completely erase you from your son's life. The burnt photo is particularly damning evidence of psychological warfare. Can we use this proactively?" "Absolutely. We'll include it in our filing as evidence of ongoing conspiracy and immediate danger to you and your son." Martinez's assistant prepared multiple copies of all documents while Brian waited. Emergency custody petitions, restraining orders, property possession requests, and civil lawsuits, enough paperwork to bury Lena's scheme under an avalanche of legal consequences. I'm also recommending we serve papers simultaneously on your wife, her mother, and Trevor Blaine. Hit them all at once before they can coordinate a response. How long before the emergency hearing? 48 to 72 hours. Family court judges take child endangerment seriously, especially with this level of documentation. Brian left the law office with copies of all filings and a detailed timeline for the next week. Martinez would handle the legal maneuvering while Brian prepared for the final phase of his counterattack. That evening, Lena seemed nervous about something. "Did you have a good day at work?" she asked over dinner. "Productive. Finished that motorcycle part I've been working on." "That's nice." Grady looked between his parents. "Are you guys okay? You both seem weird lately." "We're fine, buddy," Brian said. "Just some adult stuff we're working through." After Grady went to bed, Lena tried again. "Brian, I feel like we need to talk about us. About our relationship." "What about it?" "I feel like we're growing apart. Like you don't really see me anymore." Brian studied her face, looking for genuine emotion behind the rehearsed words. "What would you like me to see?" "I don't know. The woman you married? Maybe? The person I used to be before life got so routine. People change, Lena. Sometimes they become someone completely different." She flinched at his tone. "That sounds like an accusation. Just an observation. I'm trying to have a real conversation with you." "Are you?" "Because real conversations usually involve honesty." Lena's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Forget I said anything." But Brian could see her mind working, calculating whether he suspected something. She was smart enough to recognize the subtle change in his behavior over the past weeks. "Maybe we should consider counseling," she said finally. "Maybe. I could ask around, find someone good." "You do that." After Lena went upstairs, Brian made final preparation for what would come next. Tomorrow, he would spring his trap, and Lena's conspiracy would collapse under the weight of documented evidence and legal action. Wednesday morning brought the call Brian had been expecting. Lena's voice carried forced casualness as she made her request. "I was thinking Grady could spend the night at Mom's tomorrow. You know, a fun grandmother-grandson sleepover." Brian continued reading his newspaper, not looking up. "Oh, what brought this on? Mom's been feeling lonely lately, and I thought it might be nice for us to have some alone time to work on our relationship issues." The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so calculated. Lena was planning to remove Grady from the house so she could stage whatever incident they'd been planning, but she was framing it as relationship improvement. "What did you have in mind for our alone time?" "I don't know. Maybe we could have dinner, really talk about what's been bothering us lately." "Sounds nice." Lena seemed surprised by his easy agreement. "Really? You don't mind Grady being away overnight? He loves spending time with your mom. And you're right, we probably need to talk." After Lena left for her fake yoga class, Brian prepared for the evening ahead. He knew exactly what they were planning, and he was ready. That evening, Grady packed an overnight bag with excitement. "Can I take my tablet to Grandma Clara's?" "Sure, buddy, but I want you to keep something for me, okay?" Brian showed Grady a small digital recorder, no bigger than a key fob. "This is just a backup device for my work projects. Can you keep it in your backpack? Don't take it out or play with it. Just carry it with you." "Okay, Dad." "Is it important?" "Very important." When Lena came to collect Grady for the sleepover, Brian hugged his son tightly. "Be good for Grandma Clara, okay? I'll see you soon." "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, buddy." At 9:47 p.m., his phone buzzed with an audio alert from the recording device in Grady's backpack. The conversation was crystal clear. Lena's voice. "So we're really doing this tomorrow night?" Trevor's voice. "Everything's set up. I'll move his tools and documents from the garage to the storage unit. Make it look like he packed up and ran off." Clara's voice. "What if someone asks where he went?" Trevor. "That's where you come in. You tell them he was acting strange lately, talking about starting over somewhere else. Maybe mention some financial problems." Lena. "And I call the police when?" Trevor. "Give me until midnight to finish moving everything. Then you call and report him missing. Tell them he yelled at Grady last night, said he's not right in the head anymore. Make it sound like he had a breakdown." Clara. "The neighbors will back up the story?" Trevor. "They won't need to. By the time police investigate, all his stuff will be gone. Looks like he planned it and left voluntarily." Lena. "What about custody? If he's really gone, I get Grady automatically, right?" Trevor, after a few months with no contact, yeah. Courts don't give custody to deadbeat dads who abandon their families. The recording continued for another 15 minutes, with all three conspirators finalizing their plan to make Brian appear to have abandoned his family. They would remove his belongings, create a false narrative about his mental state, and use his apparent disappearance to secure permanent custody for Lena. Brian saved the recording and immediately forwarded it to Martinez's emergency number. Then he prepared for their arrival. But instead of waiting to be framed as a man who'd abandoned his family, Brian was about to show them what real strategic planning looked like at 6 a.m. Thursday morning. Brian was already awake when his phone rang. Martinez's voice carried grim satisfaction. I've heard the recording. This is attempted kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy to file false police reports. We're moving immediately. What's the plan? Multi-pronged attack. While they're executing their scheme, we'll be executing ours. Sheriff's deputies are standing by, and I've prepared evidence packages for multiple recipients. Brian had spent the night preparing his own materials. I'm ready. First, we serve legal papers on all three conspirators simultaneously. Then we deliver evidence packages to strategic targets while they're still reeling from the legal assault. By 8 a.m., Brian was driving toward Clara's house with Martinez and two sheriff's deputies following in separate vehicles. The morning air felt charged with the energy of decisive action. Clara answered the door in her bathrobe, clearly not expecting visitors. Her face went white when she saw Brian flanked by uniformed officers and an attorney. Mrs. Bexley, I'm Deputy Harrison. We have legal documents to serve you, and we're here to collect Grady Rourke under an emergency custody order. I don't understand. What legal documents? The deputy handed her a thick envelope. You're being served with a civil lawsuit for conspiracy, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. You have 15 days to respond. While Clara read the papers with shaking hands, Martinez stepped forward. Mrs. Bexley, we also have recordings of you conspiring to file false police reports and help stage the disappearance of Mr. Rourke. I suggest you contact an attorney immediately. This is impossible. We didn't do anything. Ma'am, we have you on tape planning to remove Mr. Rourke's belongings and tell police he abandoned his family. That's fraud and conspiracy. Grady appeared at the top of the stairs, confused by the commotion. Dad, what's happening? Everything's okay, buddy. You're coming home with me. As they collected Grady and his belongings, Clara stood frozen in her doorway, the legal documents clutched in her hands. Their next stop was TB Construction's business office. Trevor's white pickup truck sat in the parking area. But as they approached, he emerged from the trailer carrying boxes clearly in the middle of moving Brian's stolen tools and documents. Mr. Blaine, Deputy Harrison called out. Stop right there. Trevor's face went pale as he realized he'd been caught red-handed with stolen property. The boxes in his arms contained Brian's power tools, work documents, and personal files. You're being served with multiple lawsuits and a restraining order, Martinez announced, handing Trevor his legal papers. You're also under arrest for theft and conspiracy. As Trevor was handcuffed and read his rights, Brian photographed the stolen items as evidence. Everything had been documented, time-stamped, and preserved for court. The final stop was Brian's own house, where Lena was presumably preparing to call police and report him missing. Instead, she found deputies waiting to serve her with papers. Mrs. Rourke, you're being served with an emergency custody order, divorce papers, and a restraining order. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises. Lena's shock was complete. This is insane. You can't do this. Ma'am, we have recordings of you planning to file false police reports and help stage your husband's disappearance. I suggest you comply with the court orders. But Brian wasn't finished. While Lena packed her belongings under deputy supervision, he was implementing the second phase of his counterattack. He personally delivered evidence packages to 4 strategic targets. Lena's employer, A Portfolio, containing recordings of her planning illegal activities during work hours, along with evidence of her hidden financial accounts and fraudulent behavior. County Fraud Department complete documentation of Trevor's insurance fraud history, his involvement in the conspiracy, and evidence of his business operating outside legal boundaries. Clara's HOA reports of unlicensed dumping on her property, along with photographs of the illegal storage and disposal activities that had been conducted in her backyard. Police department timestamp surveillance footage showing intent to fabricate a missing persons report, along with audio recordings of the conspiracy and evidence of attempted theft. Each package was professionally prepared, legally documented, and delivered with a cover letter explaining the criminal conspiracy that had been uncovered. By noon, all three conspirators were dealing with legal consequences from multiple directions. Lena had been served and evicted from the family home. Trevor was in custody facing theft and conspiracy charges. Clara was facing civil lawsuits, HOA violations, and potential criminal charges that Brian's systematic approach had destroyed their scheme before they could execute it, while simultaneously building an unshakable legal case for permanent custody of his son. That afternoon, he picked Grady up from school and took him for ice cream. "Dad, kids at school are saying weird things about Mom. Is everything okay? Some adults made very bad choices, son. Now, they have to face the consequences of those choices. Are you sad about Mom?" "I'm sad that she chose to hurt people instead of trying to fix our problems. But I'm not sad that you're safe now." "Me too." The multi-front attack had worked perfectly. While Lena, Clara, and Trevor had been focused on their single scheme, Brian had prepared comprehensive legal and administrative assaults that hit them from every possible angle. They had underestimated not just his intelligence, but his understanding of how to use systems and institutions to achieve victory through legitimate channels. Monday morning, Brian sat at the plaintiff's table in Judge Patricia Hendricks' courtroom, watching as Lena, Clara, and Trevor filed in with their hastily assembled legal team. 3 different attorneys for 3 defendants who'd clearly spent the weekend trying to coordinate a defense against multiple criminal and civil charges. Lena looked haggard, her usual perfect appearance replaced by dark circles under her eyes and clothes that suggested sleepless nights. Clara sat rigidly beside her daughter, radiating the same passive-aggressive anger she'd always wielded like a weapon. Trevor appeared uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit and shackles, having been denied bail due to the theft charges. Judge Hendricks, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and no patience for games, reviewed the case file with methodical precision. "This is an emergency custody hearing regarding Grady Rourke, age 8. Mr. Rourke is requesting sole custody based on allegations of conspiracy and endangerment. Mrs. Rourke is contesting the petition." Martinez stood up. "Your Honor, we have extensive evidence of a conspiracy to stage Mr. Rourke's disappearance, steal his property, and file false police reports to secure fraudulent custody of his son." Lena's attorney, a young woman who'd clearly been hired on short notice, objected. "Your Honor, these so-called recordings were obtained without consent and may not be admissible." "Your Honor," Martinez responded smoothly, "Oregon is a one-party consent state for recordings. Mr. Rourke was legally entitled to record conversations involving his minor son, who was present during the planning sessions." Judge Hendricks nodded. "I'll allow the recordings." "Proceed, Mr. Martinez." The next hour was a systematic destruction of Lena's credibility. Martinez played the audio recordings of the conspiracy discussions, including the detailed plan to move Brian's belongings and tell police he yelled at Grady last night, said he's not right in the head anymore. He presented financial records showing the hidden Venmo account and suspicious transactions with Trevor's construction company. He displayed surveillance photographs of late-night meetings and equipment transfers. Most damaging of all, he showed the burnt family photograph and played the recording of Trevor being caught red-handed with Brian's stolen tools and documents. "Your Honor," Martinez concluded, "this evidence shows clear premeditation to commit fraud, theft, and filing false police reports. The conspirators planned to make Mr. Rourke appear to have abandoned his family, then use that fabricated abandonment to secure permanent custody. The child would have been traumatized by believing his father had willingly left him." Lena's attorney attempted damage control. "Your Honor, my client may have made poor choices in her personal relationships, but that doesn't make her an unfit mother." "Counselor," Judge Hendricks interrupted, Your client was recorded planning to steal her husband's property, stage his disappearance, and lie to police about his mental state. In my courtroom, that constitutes conspiracy to commit multiple felonies. Trevor's attorney tried a different approach. Your Honor, my client has no relationship with the child and shouldn't be included in custody decisions. Your client, the judge responded dryly, was caught in possession of stolen property while attempting to stage a man's disappearance. His relationship to the child is irrelevant. His actions endangered the child's psychological welfare and family stability. The hearing concluded with Judge Hendricks delivering a ruling that exceeded even Brian's expectations. Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting Mr. Rourke sole physical and legal custody of Grady Rourke. Mrs. Rourke will be permitted supervised visitation only, pending completion of court-ordered psychological evaluation and counseling. Furthermore, I'm referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Conspiracy to file false police reports, theft, and attempted fraud are serious felonies in this state. The temporary restraining orders will remain in effect for all parties, and I'm adding a provision that Mrs. Rourke undergo psychological evaluation before any custody modifications will be considered. Lena burst into tears, clutching Clara's arm. This isn't fair. He's taking my son away. Mrs. Rourke, Judge Hendricks said sternly, you participated in a scheme to psychologically traumatize your son by making him believe his father had abandoned him. The court's primary concern is the child's welfare, not your feelings. As they filed out of the courtroom, Trevor made the mistake of looking directly at Brian despite the restraining order. Deputy Harrison immediately stepped forward. Mr. Blaine, you're in violation of the restraining order. Any contact with Mr. Rourke, including eye contact, constitutes a violation. Outside the courthouse, Martinez shook Brian's hand. That went better than I expected. Judge Hendricks has zero tolerance for fraud involving children. What's next? The civil lawsuit proceeds separately. With this morning's ruling, we have overwhelming leverage. They'll probably want to settle to avoid a public trial that would expose even more details. Brian nodded, but his mind was already moving beyond legal victories. What about the criminal charges? The DA's office will file within 2 weeks. With Trevor caught red-handed stealing your property and the recordings of the conspiracy, this is a slam-dunk prosecution. 2 months later, the criminal cases concluded with guilty pleas from all 3 conspirators. Lena received 18 months probation and mandatory psychological counseling. Clara received 12 months probation and 200 hours of community service. Trevor received 2 years in minimum security prison for theft, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. The civil lawsuit settled out of court, with Lena forfeiting her share of the marital home and retirement accounts. Clara was forced to sell her house to pay legal fees and settlement costs. Trevor's construction business dissolved, and his contracting license was permanently revoked. Brian garnished Lena's portion of their marital assets to cover legal fees and establish a college fund for Grady. The systematic destruction of the conspiracy had not only protected his son, but secured their financial future. 6 months after the custody hearing, Brian converted his garage into a professional machine shop and began teaching welding classes at the community college 2 evenings a week. The additional income wasn't necessary, but the routine provided structure and purpose. Grady thrived in his new environment. His grades improved dramatically, his confidence grew, and he began inviting school friends over regularly. The stability of a home without constant undercurrents of deception had freed him to be a normal child. The supervised visits with Lena were awkward and infrequent. Grady tolerated them out of obligation, but showed no enthusiasm for spending time with the mother who had planned to make him believe his father had abandoned him. Brian stood in his expanded workshop, now a proper machine shop with professional-grade equipment and ventilation systems. The community college welding classes had grown from 12 students to 30, with a waiting list for the next semester. Grady sat at a small workbench in the corner, carefully filing metal under Brian's supervision. At 9 years old, he developed genuine interest in metalworking, approaching each project with the same methodical patience his father demonstrated. "Dad, is this piece smooth enough?" Brian examined his son's work. "Perfect. You're getting really good at this. Maybe I'll be a fabricator like you when I grow up. You can be anything you want, buddy. But if you choose fabrication, I'll teach you everything I know. The doorbell rang, interrupting their work session. Brian found Martinez on his front porch, holding a manila envelope. Final paperwork from the criminal cases, the attorney said. All 3 defendants completed their sentences. Lena finished her probation and counseling, Clara completed community service, and Trevor was released last week. Brian nodded, feeling no satisfaction in their punishments. Justice had been served, but brought no joy. Any word on Lena's petition for increased visitation? Denied again. The family court evaluator's report recommended continuing supervised visits only. Grady expressed clear preferences during his interview with the court-appointed psychologist. How did he handle the evaluation? Like a champ. He told the psychologist he felt safer living with you, and that he didn't want to spend more time with his mother because she told lies about Dad and made me scared he was going to leave. After Martinez left, Brian returned to the workshop where Grady was carefully organizing tools on the pegboard. Was that about Mom? Grady asked without looking up. Yeah, just some final paperwork. Is she going to try to make me live with her? No, son. The judge said you can stay here with me. Good. Grady continued organizing tools with focused concentration. Dad, do you think Mom will ever stop being angry about what happened? The question revealed remarkable insight for a 9-year-old. I don't know, buddy. Some people have trouble accepting responsibility for their choices. I hope she gets better, but I'm glad I don't have to worry about it anymore. That's a very mature attitude. I learned it from you. That evening, after Grady went to bed, Brian sat on his front porch with coffee, looking out at the quiet streets of Maple Ridge. The neighborhood looked the same as it had 3 years ago, but everything had changed. His marriage was over, dissolved by lies and betrayal that ran deeper than he'd ever imagined. His extended family was gone, scattered by legal consequences and the revelation of their willingness to traumatize a child for personal gain. But what remained was stronger than what had been lost. Brian had his son, his work, his integrity, and his peace of mind. He protected what mattered most and built a new life on a foundation of truth instead of deception. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. After a moment's hesitation, he opened it. I know you'll never forgive me, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. Take care of our son. L. Brian read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Forgiveness wasn't on the table, not after she'd planned to make their son believe his father had abandoned him. Some betrayals were unforgivable, and some consequences were permanent. But Brian felt no bitterness, only resolve. He'd faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined to protect the people and principles that mattered. Lena had taught him that trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. But she'd also taught him that he was capable of strategic thinking under extreme pressure and unwavering loyalty to those he loved. Those were lessons worth learning, even at such a high cost. As the streetlights came on across Maple Ridge, Brian finished his coffee and went inside to check on his sleeping son. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new reasons to be grateful for the life they'd built together. The shadows were gone. Only light remained.